Hey, what's up, guys? How you doing? It's me, Mr. 4K Upscaler. I purposely turned the lights off so I can show you just how beautiful the HDR looks here on Samsung KS8000. This is where that peak brightness plays a huge role on HDR. I'm gonna go through a couple of stills here just to show you like how beautifully this movie it's rendered with HDR. Now, there's nothing I can do about the grain. The grain, it's still in the movie. Is there a way for them to remove that grain? Yes, there is a way for them to do that. It would just take a lot of time. They would have to do each frame for 100 and whatever 38 minutes of the movie. Are they going to do that? I highly doubt that. That's up to the director. He chooses what type of version of a movie should be released. But let's talk about the HDR on this movie. Like in this scene, you see how this lantern that he's holding, how it's reflecting everything naturally. His red robe, his face and eyes and everything pops beautifully in this movie. The reason why this movie works well on HDR is because it's like Blade Runner. Both the Blade Runner and this movie are in the dark scenes where there's a lot of light and contrast and dark, and when you have a lot of light and dark and contrast and color, that's what happens. A lot of reflections, that's what you get here. Same pretty much deal. So I'm going to go through some of the frames really quick here just to show you. I guess I could play just a little bit. See what I'm saying? You see how it's moving? You see how it's like exactly reflecting his robe the way it should be. And that's what's so great about the HDR in this movie. Here, let's do it one more time. And remember, I purposely turn off the lights so you can see it better this way. You see? And look, you can even see it from this side. Just look how much it's being reflected here on his face, and it just looks amazing. Okay, let's go to another scene really quick. When they're sitting at the table and they're eating and drinking and talking about, the past and everything. And look now here, when he moves the lantern up, you see how the light is now reflecting differently. You see, again, this looks much better in person. When you're watching this in person, looks gazillion times better. And if you guys have QLED, or if you have a A1 OLED or C7, B7 or E7 OLED, then you're definitely going to appreciate this. It's going to look mind-boggling. Now let's go to that dinner scene really quick. And here's another great scene when they're sitting at the table. You see how everything's being represented naturally from the light, the over reflecting candles. They're reflecting all over the table, so everything looks natural. And even right here in this scene, I will play this scene just for like a few seconds so you can see what I'm talking about. When he goes to sit down, keep an eye right here on the reflection of his face and his robe really quick. You see how beautifully that's being rendered. You have to pay attention to like reflection and shadows and all of that stuff. And even here with Keanu Reeves when he's out eating and everything, just look at that HDR here pop. It almost feels three-dimensional. It really feels like you're there. But this is only when HDR is done properly. This is what Ridley Scott was talking about. Francis Ford Coppola was involved in this one to make sure that the HDR looks great. Ridley Scott was involved in Blade Runner to make sure that their movie looks great in HDR, and it truly does. And I'm pretty sure Steven Spielberg was involved in both E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind to make sure it looks great. And here's yet another great scene right here. Right here, check this scene out. Keep in mind, this is a 25-year-old movie. And the kind of transfer you're getting here, it looks as if it was shot yesterday. Like, minus that grain, I know. But if that grain is bothering you, you can always move the sharpness down to the 0. So that way it won't bother you. Okay? Just look at them candles, like, just look how realistically those candles are being lit up. Everything here, it's rendered the way it should be, the way it should look. And again, my camera here, it's not doing jack shit in comparison to you watching this in person, But it will also depend on what type of TV you have, what type of HDR TV you have. If you have a really good high dynamic range 4K TV, then you're definitely going to be enjoying the hell out of this movie. And look at this scene right here. Look how well that robe just pops with redness. It looks fantastic. And look, even here, look at the depth of field that you have when you're watching this. Like, it feels three-dimensional. Look at that candle out there in the back next to his portrayal right there. And the way I score this movie, I score it based on how old this movie is. Okay, if this was a movie that was shot last year with a 6.5K Aries camera, then yeah, I would expect this to be like super eye candy. But you have to remember, this is a restoration. They're restoring this film that was shot on a celluloid and 25 years ago. Different technology back then, different lighting, different everything. So for them to be able to remaster it to look this way, that is pretty good if you ask me personally. And pay attention to these two candles right here and how well they're being overshadowed while he's eating that chicken, Mr. John Wick. And even here, when he pulls out the sword, you can even see reflection on the sword. I kid you not. Look at that. Now, this is Samsung KS8000. Now, a couple of things that Samsung KS8000 has, obviously, it has that 1000 plus peak brightness nits, which is needed for high dynamic range to truly take the advantage of that peak bright detail. And it also has the quantum dot nanocrystal cells, which also help with a full wide color gamut. The only thing that's missing, it's the deep dark levels. The full array of backlit would have been great, but it's hard to achieve that because this is edge lit. All right, but it still looks great. Now, if you're watching this on an OLED, you're definitely going to appreciate those deep dark levels will be blending in perfectly, almost like three-dimensionally, with this movie. So it really depends on what type of screen are you watching it. If you're watching it on like a Dolby Vision or HDR projector, I don't know, they might have one out there. Yeah, you're gonna even have more fidelity of detail on a bigger screen, a bigger canvas. The bigger the canvas, the better, because you're getting more detail, more pixels, so you get to see more stuff. So it looks great. HDR really looks great, and the reason I'm doing this video like this, because I want to examine this HDR. My first video was just my first look and calibration, but this is really examining the HDR and trying to explain to you, if you're on the fence whether or not you should purchase this movie. Maybe you have a Blu-ray copy of this movie, whether or not you should purchase it. Yes, absolutely. Definitely, if you have a great 4K HDR TV, you will take the advantage of this. And Sony really did spend a lot of time. They didn't do it like half-assed. They spend a lot of time with Francis Ford Coppola to make sure that it looks really good, and it does. But it'll all depend on what type of TV you have, okay? So yeah, you guys should definitely pick this movie up. Maybe I can play just one short little scene here for like a few seconds. That's about it. So there you have it. Again, I cannot show you too much, but you guys get the idea. It looks fantastic. So go pick this movie up. You're not going to be disappointed. It's not just me saying this. You can listen to other reviews. Pick up this movie. Actually, let me give you a list of some 4K HDR movies you should pick up. Pick up a Blade Runner, Bram Stoker, Dracula, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., and of course, Transformers look fantastic as well. The Last Night. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you very much. This is Mr. 4K Upscaler. Have a good night, good morning, and be good. Be good to one another. Take care.